Thank you, thank you. You guys are the biggest crowd, the best crowd. Thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here at Gamescom. It's my first Congress, and it's lovely. It's the intellectual side of Gamescom. It's really good to be here. Yeah, I want to talk to you about accessibility, choice, and the human touch. I'm this guy here. God, I'm big now. Yeah, I work in London. I make games, I make movies, all sorts, and I've been wanting to sort of build bridges between the medium, all those different media as well, and I'll get into that a bit later. Actually, a thing that really sort of changed my life was Gamescom 2022. It was the first one after the pandemic, or the pandemic was sort of like at least sort of like starting to fizzle out a little bit, and I was here in the main hall promoting a game that I made called The Last Worker, with a bunch of amazing people, including Hui here in the audience, in Taiwan, with a team in Taiwan. Yeah, I was not a very happy person back then. This is a photo that I was taken during that week. I was sort of 15 kilos heavier and generally quite angry about the world. And I made a game that was a satire of the sort of increasingly automated existence that we're living, and we just spent, a couple of years, working from home, stuck at home in various lockdowns, etc. And during that time, we were working on this game called The Last Worker, where you were the last human worker in a near future fulfillment center, like an Amazon warehouse, essentially, the size of Manhattan. And so it was kind of depressing to be working from home while making about a game, while telling a story about a guy who is also stuck alone. It was a bit too close to the bone. But the game was super well received critically. It was the only game in competition in the 78th Venice Film Festival. I was very proud of the game. But part of the reason why I was angry or grumpy and depressed was I knew it wasn't going to sell. I knew that the game had sort of come like 4 or 5 years too late. There was a game where I wanted to make a first-person narrative adventure like Firewatch, but with a bit more gameplay, and I just knew it came too late. It took us too long to make it, and while it was critically acclaimed, it sort of had passed the boat. And the other thing, it missed the boat, but also it came out. This is the main protagonist, Kurt, right here, who was essentially flying in this mobility scooter in this enormous fulfillment center where all the other colleagues were robots. And I was walking around at Gamescom knowing that it won't sell. And as I was standing at the booth, like we received like a delivery of donuts at like 10:30 in the morning, and everyone was sort of like stuffing themselves with those, and already had a sugar drop half an hour later, and I was looking around, and everyone was looking like me, sort of depressed, coming out of the sort of trauma of the pandemic, worried about how their games are even going to be noticed in a landscape where there were about to be 14,000 games released on Steam that year, and I realized I didn't want to become this. I didn't want to be continuously depressed. I didn't want to gain weight and lose hope at the same time. And I started getting fit. I mean, I felt like I had to do something about it. And so I started working out. This is not going to be a fitness guru talk, because I'm definitely not one of them. Don't worry. I wanted to do something to at least counter the sort of downwards sort of trend that I felt the games were going through. The stress that it was putting me under was taking a toll on my body as well. Yeah, those were the 14,000 games. This is what Steam does. This is how it distributes your games. And as I was walking around, I also saw that there was a booth, I think it was TikTok, right next to ours, where we were showing The Last Worker, where they had this tagline here: "We bring your content to life." I was like, fuck, do we make dead things? Is it really, like, it takes TikTok to make our stuff come to life? Are they zombies, our games? once they're on the market. I was quite offended by that. And so this clicker is not the most responsive. So I had this T-shirt that I was walking around with last year that had this little tagline on there, because I was really angry at this content term. I felt it was very dehumanizing, and I'm going to get back to that in a second. And I felt that was one of the things that made games and also culture's access to games inaccessible. As I was starting to work out, I decided that I would take escalators instead of stairs. I would be physical and all that stuff. And I was, really sort of enjoying, making the world my playground. But as I said, I'm not going to be a fitness guru here. That's what this guy does. He's the head of Take-Two. He sells these pills as well. It's weird, isn't it? But yeah, I think he's in his 60s. I mean, he's a very good, very, very fit man. But I'm not going to be doing that for you today. I'm lucky. I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm one of the lucky ones who have to have two legs, to be able to work. I can take myself places. I can walk around. I can wave my hands around. I can be on the stage giving this chat. I'm a privileged human being, but many aren't. The thing that I realized while working on The Last Worker is that the game itself was inaccessible. It was a game that had to be on consoles and PC and VR. It was actually quite difficult to play for some people. It required sort of basic skills such as moving camera around and sort of like using all the different buttons on there and stuff. And I was thinking about that. It's like, am I really truly having fun playing this? How am I going to invite people who actually like to have a really good story told about the current state of the world? How are they going to be able to join my game? And there's this little handheld device that was announced during the making of The Last Worker called the Playdate, which was just this little handheld with a crank. And so I made a spin-off of The Last Worker on that, and it had more accessibility options on that little handheld game than the main game on the console and PC, where we were constantly running out of time, etc. Here you could play the game either with a crank, you could use it with an accelerometer, you could play it holding it sideways. We put all of these things in, and this little game on a handheld, which only had 60,000 in the world at the time, sold more copies than The Last Worker, the main game, which had all this marketing and stuff behind it. I was like, wow, accessibility and fun really work. Like when you make something playable and fun to most people, to more people, it sells better, it is loved more. There's something there. This is Skew, this little game on the Playdate. And then that inspired me to make another game called Sea Smash VRS, which is a game about playing squash, essentially, playing a game of racquetball in space. And it sounds like it's a very physical game in VR if you play it in the standard sort of full body standing upright mode. But I wanted this to be the most accessible sports game ever made. I wanted it to be the most accessible VR game. And it's a beautiful title. It's actually about to come out on PlayStation 5 and as a non-VR title at the end of September this year. And as I was at EGX, for instance, in London, and I was visited by so many people, and we had queues of 50, 60 people lining up to play the game. It was an amazing time. It was incredible to experience people of all different kinds and different walks of life, different abilities, different preferences playing the game. There was a guy with a broken arm. There was this incredible gentleman in a wheelchair who has the most incredible arcade game collection in his house in London. And he was able to play the game against other people in VR who were playing full body and running around and jumping around, not just on the same level, but he actually beat them as well. And it made me very proud. And after EGX, having seen a bunch of people play the game, we put even more accessibility options in there. One-handed serves and all sorts of other stuff. It was very inspiring to me because we were just a team of 7. And so I said, this is now the standard that I have to meet at least. I have to do this at the very least, but I have to budget for more. I have to be more accessible. Yes. So right now, accessibility is an option in games. It's a little option menu in most games. I believe that accessibility is not optional. It's not something that should just be shoved into the corner of a menu. I think we need to think about it deep down. Top down, top left and right. It has to be just in the forefront of our mind and our thinking and our design thinking. And I would like to redefine what it means, what accessibility means. I mean, right now it's here, I mean, if you just look on the dictionary, it's the quality of being able to reach or entered, or the quality of being easy to obtain or use, and the quality of being easily understood or appreciated. And I believe that games, most games, are none of those things. This is the access controller on PlayStation, which is an option. You have to buy that extra for the PlayStation. I love this controller. It actually is the one that I wish was packaged in with the PlayStation 5 to begin with. When you buy a Nintendo Switch, for instance, the thing that resembles a regular controller is called the Pro controller. You have to buy that as an option. But sadly, this one you have to buy extra, but it's a really great controller. You can modulate it, you can switch it around, you can change the way it works. It's a really great controller, and also kind of reminds me of the old arcade days. It looks like an arcade stick. It's joyful to look at. This is what the standard control looks like. It's actually, like, when you think about it, a highly technological and actually kind of intimidating piece of tech. You know, tiny little buttons and all sorts of crazy arrangements. You know, I mean, you need a driver's license to be able to use this kind of thing. But that's the standard. So I believe that accessibility options are actually bringing division rather than actually bringing us together in the way they are currently designed. It's because the standards that have been set for people who are ultimately not at all concerned with accessibility. And we live in a very divided world right now. We're segregated by populations, and our devices are segregated. We very much distinguish between VR and consoles and mobile, and in the game industry. Like I talked to a bunch of developers and publishers and investors on Monday, and I told them that I released a VR game last year, and they go, "Oh, so you're a VR developer?" I'm like, "No, I'm just a developer. I just make stuff." "Oh, all right. You can do the other stuff too." It's like, yeah. So there's a strange segregation that's happening everywhere in people's thinking. Everyone's really very binary in their thinking. The players are also divided. You know, there's lots of toxicity online in the social networks. And I've been thinking about equity versus equality, right? If you I won't read the definitions of that now, but you know, this is a depiction of equality. You know, everyone gets to stand on the same box, no to look over the fence. When you do equity, you know, the box gets adjusted. So the person that is shorter in this case gets to look over the fence. But I think even this is not enough. What we need is justice. What we need is to get rid of the fence so everyone gets to look at it regardless. And that is our goal. That should be our goal. Not to put these artificial barriers in between us and the enjoyment of things. So we're segregated by tech and by commerce and capitalism, of course, as well. But tech, I think, is the biggest factor that segregates us. So content, I'm coming back to that, is a word that has become more and more used on the tip of everyone's tongues. Something to describe a film, a movie, a piece of music, your kids' pictures, everything is content. And when everything is content, then everything is nothing. Everything loses its meaning because everything is supposed to fill someone else's bucket, someone else's content pipeline. Tech is making things more and more inaccessible. The cloud, think about the image that puts in your mind. The fact that these great tech overlords take data that you no longer own, take games that you buy but you don't really own at the end of it, and then move them up into the clouds like gods. And then they can just delete them at will from a server, and then say, well, sorry, we no longer have the license agreement in place, but thanks for your money. He's one of those great tech overlords. Since we're in Germany, there's a great word that my dad, who was German, taught me, which is this one, Fachidiot, which is basically it's a specialized idiot. It's someone who's so good at one thing that he's absolutely awful at everything else. I think that describes this gentleman pretty well, I would say. And he's one of the key architects of the segregation and the division and the toxicity that's happening in this world right now. And one of the things that I believe segregates us and also keeps us from bringing more players in at a time when the game industry is actually contracting, when it's not really inviting a whole lot of new players in. It's happening in mobile, but it's not really happening in the console and PC space, is that we call people who play games and who know how to really use those joypads real good, gamers. But we don't call people who read books, bookers, do we? And we don't call people who watch movies, moviers, or people who listen to music, musicers. It's very odd that we sort of have to be specialized to enjoy a piece of culture, a piece of art, the way we do when we play games. Games have become too specialized. But I don't think that culture should require a license. You know, a basic degree of education would be good. But that's not down to the culture, that's down to society and politicians to allow everyone the basic access, which is a basic human right to education. Sorry, I just skipped something. Oops. Yeah, and so the elephant in the room here, I believe, beyond tech, is this, is guns and the military. The video game industry has a very long and very deep connection to the military-industrial complex. For instance, even here, Sega, this was going to be its penultimate console. They, for instance, worked with Lockheed Martin very, very directly. Lockheed Martin built the architecture for their arcade hardware in the 90s. But of course, that collaboration with the military and with the arms trade hasn't ended there. It got a bit more intense. Interestingly, the company that introduced the trigger to games was the most family-friendly one. I mean, it started with Duck Hunt. Nintendo put a gun in our living rooms and made us point it at TVs, but that was cute and innocent, and they were just virtual ducks. But it was actually the N64 when they made GoldenEye, released GoldenEye, that had the first trigger there. It was just still this tiny little trigger there, and it was an option. It was optional to use that trigger. It was something that you would barely even know was there. But that trigger kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger with each generation of joypad since. To a degree with now on a PS5, this is this highly engineered button with resistance buttons on it, etc. The joypad has de facto been transformed into a gun. It is the most important and most fun thing to do is to pull the trigger on it. And in the real world, there's only two things that you pull triggers for. Really, it's guns and power hoses, which is why Power Wash Simulator is such a big hit in VR in games now. But this is the standard. The gun is the standard game, which explains why Microsoft has now bought Call of Duty for $69 billion. I mean, they bought Activision, but ultimately the biggest IP within this massive acquisition, which is 9 times bigger than their acquisition of Skype. 15 years ago, Skype being of course, a telephony thing which was supposed to bring people together worldwide. This thing about shooting people in the face was worth 9 times more. And it sort of feels a little bit that the whole world right now has been turned into Call of Duty cosplay. It feels, and when we're watching these super mechanized soldiers, by the way, this guy's wearing a HoloLens here. Microsoft doesn't actually make VR games, but they do accept $23 billion contracts from the Pentagon to turn soldiers into RoboCop. So, again, another form of segregation, another form of putting the emphasis on something that is perhaps alienating a vast array of the population from games. And then there's realism. Call of Duty being a good example. It's a simulation, it's a killing and a war simulation. Realism is starting to kill creativity. The more expensive, the games are getting more and more expensive because we're making them more and more realistic with Unreal Engine, etc. We're trying to mimic reality rather than living in made-up, beautiful, stylized worlds. It's another form of segregation, and it's segregating us from our own imagination. Thankfully, indies are thriving, the ones that get noticed anyway within the landfill that is Steam. But this sort of realism has also started to segregate the industry. We have putting so much money into making things look like reality that the budgets have ballooned out of control. Developers are getting crunched to death. It's an intense period. Funnily enough, I picked up the latest issue of Edge magazine a couple of months ago, and I was really excited to open it. And then I was, to my shock and horror, I found that there was a quote of mine in there. And that one, again, would not make me a lot of friends at Microsoft. I have friends at Microsoft, hopefully, thankfully. But I said this: Microsoft's grand strategy was to spend PlayStation out of business. Sadly, they now seem to have spent the entire video game business out of business. Yeah, I was a bit shocked that they printed that without asking me for permission first. But there, I said it. I own up to it now. This commodification and consolidation is also killing culture. It is also segregating us and separating us and separating real creativity from culture and from art. And I realized in a recent couple of years that came to this conclusion that the only thing that we all have in common is our difference. And if we create these standards, these tech standards, then we are ultimately not taking that into account. Interestingly, speaking of creativity and realism, Tango Gameworks, great team in Japan. They've been around for 23 years, made some of the greatest games of all time. They released a game called Hi-Fi Rush, super creative, beautiful, unique in its gameplay mechanics. A real gem, won many, many awards. That studio was shut down earlier this year by Xbox, and this is not an anti-Xbox talk. I'm trying to punch up to everybody as much as I can. They shut him down, and thankfully they've just been acquired by Krafton, Korean company, and saved from closure. But it was sad to see that a company that has just invested $70 billion into Call of Duty would shut down a studio that's created something so special and something that's sold a lot, but it was somehow not profitable enough. So game preservation is important, though. It's another form of accessibility that we need, is to have access to the games that got us here, the games that allowed this art form to become what it is today. You know, when you look at other art mediums, when you look at music, when you look at cinema, preserving those old films, finding those old plays by Shakespeare and analyzing it, etc., is essential. If we don't know where we came from, we will never know where to go. And you know, again, Microsoft said that it's very important for them to preserve games, but then only a month later they said that they're going to delete Forza Horizon 4 from Steam later this year. It's one of their own titles. It's a shame. It's an incredible game. This was based on license deals, but it's dangerous right now to be in this world where commercial agreements, and because the world has been dephysicalized, because games are now living in those clouds, we can delete a few years and entire legacies of games just like that at the click of a button and make them disappear from history. So I believe we need to preserve access to our past as well. This is another form of accessibility that is essential to me. Platforms are an important player in this. You know, Steam, Epic Games Store, PlayStation. These are all very, very powerful. iTunes, these are all powerful players. But right now they're behaving like this. This is Jeff Bezos on top of his platform here. And it's a developer trying to come up. Oops. That's how it works. We're currently holding up platforms with our quote-unquote content, but they are in turn crushing us. And so accessibility also means getting access to the top of those platforms, because that is how the industry will become sustainable again. Clicker. There's a content pipeline here. Another example. This was Apple's ad for their latest iPad. This is how they crush us. I don't know if you've all seen this Crush ad when it came out a month and a half ago. Somehow they thought this was a good idea. But I had this really powerful realization that Steam would not exist without games. But games would exist without Steam. That technically makes us, the little people, little developers, quite powerful. What we make is what makes them exist. Them existing doesn't necessarily keep us from making what we do, from doing what we do. And I think we need to start having these conversations with the platforms. That's the way we have conversations with our politicians about our basic democratic rights. We have a reason to be. We have a reason to be heard. We have right to access. Because platforms need us as much as we need the platforms. Because games and play, more importantly, are universal language. You know, everyone plays. Every animal plays. You know, the way we communicate with our babies and toddlers for the first time is through play. It's not through language, not through music. They may hear it, etc., but it's those interactions of play with your cat, etc., that are the universal language. And therefore, we need to make games universally accessible. Because we're all physical beings. Some of us are mega athletes at the Olympics, and others less so. But we all have a face. We all have eyes that interact with them. Some of us can see, but we can definitely hear. We all have bodies. And games have been dephysicalized through tech. Funnily enough, we all came from the arcades. This is an old picture of Steven Spielberg. He was a big arcade gamer back in the 80s, where these spaces were shared spaces, where people of all ages would gather and play games with each other in the arcades. We sort of forget about that now, but we come from a physical and very social and very culturally diverse place, which somehow seems to have gone away more and more over the years. Again, the controller here reminds me very much of an arcade stick back in those days. Last time, we managed to actually make games accessible to the largest and vastest array of people was the Nintendo Wii. It was back in 2003, and people in retirement homes whose generation had completely skipped, well, they'd never been introduced to anything digital, were starting to play games in old people's homes. And 180 million copies were sold of Wii Sports back then. It was a huge, huge success. And then Nintendo released the Wii U, which was unfortunately a failure. And then this whole thing just disappeared, like a distant dream. And I believe that it's important for us to do this again, somehow, to find ways to make games more universally accessible, for them to actually cross generational boundaries as well, and borders. VR, I believe, has taken us in a good direction. You know, we have more and more people engaging with physical worlds. We have the gameplay mechanics in VR games don't require the driver's license that AAA games, etc., demand of you. And so the game Sea Smash, for instance, that I have coming out next month. There's no sound, sorry, so I'll talk over it. Or make this very loud. It started as a VR game, and it's now going to be playable in third person on PlayStation 5 on a regular screen. And so now people who are playing the game at home on a controller or on the Access controller, for instance, can play against people who are moving and jumping about in a physical space. Totally hybrid online gameplay. It's a lovely step, I think, into a future where people get to choose how they want to play a game, whether they want to be fully immersed in it, whether they want to just enjoy it on a small screen, when they play it on mobile, when they're moving about, they want to be sat. And I'm bringing all these people together. And I'm also bringing VR and flat together, because I also believe that those should not be segregated. So that's coming out on the 26th of September this year. I believe that we have to build bridges. We have to build bridges and give people access to education, access to audiences, access to humans, as we're doing here at the Congress, Gamescom, in general, access to culture and languages. I mean, when you take a look now at Wukong, for instance, a new game from China being the most successful title released this week, it's great to see that eventually authentic games from other cultures are starting to top the charts internationally. We need to give access and build bridges to our history and talk to the people that got us here. You know, we're an incredibly young art form. The Shakespeares, so to speak, of our industry are very much still alive. And very accessible. We need to talk to them because they have thought about everything ahead of us. They don't take the easy shortcut via a tool made by Unity or Unreal to realize their worlds. They had to build all of that from scratch. Talk to them, reach out to them. They are the true makers of possibly the greatest art form of all time. And access to opportunities in the industry, access to our communities, and access to power, which in this case are the platforms. It is important that we build bridges with them, and it's important that we talk to them, and it's important that we have these serious conversations with them, because it's also in their interest for us to be thriving down here, and to stand on top of them, and to make them shine. So let's not shy away from that. They will not take offense to you criticizing the way things work. We need to start having these conversations. They're all very receptive to it. We need to have access to information and to truth, which again, Fachidioten like Elon Musk don't necessarily want us to have. And we have to bring access and build bridges to fun for all. We need to embrace our common differences because exceptions are the rule. And I believe that exceptions, we have to be exceptional. I believe that exceptions should rule. And in that spirit, speaking of exceptions, we've had a bit of a dark time for the last month or so in the UK, for instance, with riots, a bunch of haters sort of crowding the streets. Thankfully, the population decided not to have any of that. They're instigated also by great tech overlords to lead civil wars, etc. And to those people, I think we can also just say, access denied. This is also in our power. Thank you all very much. I hope this was inspiring in some way, and have a great Congress and a great Gamescom.
Big round of applause for you, Jörg. Yeah, you did a really great job, and I think you all shaked us up, and we have to think a lot about many things. And I think we all see and feel that you're a humanist by heart. But what is your main concern that you led to write you this session?
My main concern is that we have become too complacent by we feel that our computers are accessible. We feel that we have access to 14,000 games, but we forget in the middle of all this that the curation has been entirely taken over by algorithms. And so humans no longer have access to those platforms, right? And the more we lose that, the more we lose our sense of being human.
Yeah. And I'm just curious because I love John Malkovich, and I think he's familiar to you, right? You have worked with him. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that? Not privately, maybe, but
yeah, sure.
Maybe talk about the project.
I'm the lead producer in a film called A Winter's Journey. It's based on Schubert's Winterreise, on the most performed song cycle of all time. And it's a beautiful film coming out next year, Sony Pictures Classics. Also in IMAX with live music and with Deutsche Grammophon. And we worked on that with PlayStation, actually. It's an art house film with live action performances and hand-painted animation. Every frame of the film will look like an early 19th century romanticist painting. So there we built a bridge between the past and modern audiences, something that technically should not be associated with PlayStation, Schubert, and classical music. But it's 24 songs told in 24 continuous shots. It's absolutely stunning. It's going to be gorgeous. It's been a nightmare to make, but it's got 5 years in the making. But John is one of the main characters in it. He's an incredible actor, and the whole film is without dialogue, so it's the extremely physical performances. and what John did, and the whole Martina Gedeck is in there from Das Leben der Anderen. You know, you have all these incredible actors in it. It's look out for it. A Winter's Journey next year.
Okay, so thank you very much for that, for giving us some insights. But how does that really work? Because it sounds really complicated. How can I imagine that? With playing with the PlayStation and playing the PlayStation and sitting also in the IMAX, or
no, we actually worked with Dreams with Media Molecule, the multiple BAFTA-winning team in Guildford in the UK, and we used their Creative Suite, which is almost like a Minecraft by PlayStation. Dreams, for those who aren't familiar, but it's a beautiful, very, very, very textured, very, very painterly shared community of people who make games and short films and other stuff within that. And sadly, PlayStation decided to no longer support it from, I think, end of this year. But it's a great, great title, Dreams. And so we use Dreams as the underlying technology to build, design, and also animate scenes and sets in the film. And through that, we started working more and more deeply with PlayStation and also with Sony, and therefore also with Sony Pictures Classics.
Yeah, and I think we all see that you're multi-talented, you're creative. You don't want to just work in just one field. Do you have a favorite one, or would you just say, no, I love to work on this build?
No, I believe that everything is beautiful. So ideally, I want to work in all fields at the same time and build bridges between all of them.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. We have some time left. Maybe we got a question here in the audience at the conference, so it would be great to have an interaction, right, with humans. That would be great, huh?
I would love that.
Yeah. So just raise your hand. Has anyone a question? Yeah, so you will get a microphone, maybe mine.
Hi. So not actually a question. I just wanted to say that this was a great talk and it was incredibly inspiring. And I didn't know you before, and now I do. And I will check out what you do because I'm super interested now.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your interaction. Jumping back again. All right. So,
did anyone hate the talk? I mean, for balance.
Yeah. Yeah, just a question for the audience, right?
Yeah.
Okay. No one? All right. So, Jörg, it was such a pleasure to have you here. You want to give me a hand?
Yeah.
Here we go. Thank you very much. Big round of applause for Jörg Tittel.